bank, so they'd have to take existing money, and if they increased your account by giving you the loan, they'd have to decrease their investment pool essentially. So one account would have to go down before another account goes up. So it's a very natural way of running the economy in that sense. Equally, if you repaid a loan under this system, the money wouldn't be deleted. Your bank account would go down, but the investment pool would go up, and eventually that money would make its way with interest back to the original saver or investor. So in that sense, it's quite a natural, it's the way that most economists actually think the economy runs. So I'll leave it at that. I'll happily explain a bit more about full reserve banking and exactly how that would run, separating current accounts from savings accounts and so on, and the different advantages that we could get from that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Paul. Our second speaker is Colin Spellman. Colin Spellman, it says here, was miseducated in economics at university level. He finished his degree, like other economists, with no clear understanding of simple facts about money and how it works. Although pursuing a career in natural health, he maintained an interest in the economy, especially when Ireland's money supply crashed, taking his livelihood with it. He's since become aware of the real and simple reality of how money is used against us, especially via interest charged on money creation. He now works to increase awareness of how money could work in our favour and to introduce interest-free money for Ireland. He runs a campaign called Fair Money Ireland, which you can follow on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, Colin Spellman.
Good evening. So my main, just what I'll say in my few minutes is going to be all about interest and the problems that are created by the charging of interest, because for me that's the core of our problems when money is created as interest. When money is created and interest is charged on it. The simple fact is that if you borrow to buy a house, as you must do if you want to buy a house, because you're not going to have enough money to buy a house at the beginning of your life when you're going to start a family, but you're going to need the house right away, but you're going to be able to pay for that over time, but not right now, so you will need a loan. Now what happens is that the banks will issue you with a loan, and we think that that's their money, but it's not their money. It's actually really your money, because the only reason they give you a loan is because there's collateral, the house, and because you, as a typical young person starting out in your life, are going to earn 1 to 2 million euros over your lifetime, and they know that, and it's your earning power and your productivity that actually creates the credit. So credit is really yours, not the banks. But the banks have privatized the issue of credit and turned it into a very profitable, I wouldn't call it a business, it's more like a slavery system, because of the way it's set up with the charging of interest. If you take out a loan on a house, as Paul was mentioning, it takes longer and longer. Now it takes people 30 years to pay it back. So if you take out a loan of 200,000 euros to buy a house at 5% interest over 30 years, you're actually going to pay back 500,000 euros including interest. That's the 200,000 that you borrowed and money that was created, plus 300,000 euros in interest you're going to pay over the lifetime of the loan. Now, as Paul also mentioned, the money that's created is the 200,000. It's created with the loan. The 300,000 actually isn't even created. And even if it were, you still have this massive burden on your back that you have to pay back an extra 10,000 euros per year. So this is the point. If we could have interest-free money, you'd be 10,000. And you had to take 200,000 euro mortgage, you'd be 10,000 euros better off per year. Now imagine how that would work out in the economy, where your average homeowner is 10,000 euros better off. There's 10,000 euros more spending power for actual goods and services that we need, rather than that money going to the banks. Now, what actually happens is that the banks they create the 200,000, but you have to pay back 500,000. That shortfall is only made up by other people going into even more debt so that you can go out and then compete with everyone else to try and get that money back with the extra money for the interest. Now, as you can understand, it's simple maths. That only makes matters worse. If the system gets worse and worse and worse, and there's more and more and more debt. We just went through a typical example of that here in Ireland. More and more and more debt being created, and ultimately the economy collapses under the weight of the debt. So the whole idea is that as far as I'm concerned, interest is the problem, and we need a system that's free of interest. So I'm against any kind of interest being charged whatsoever. For instance, when a loan, you're probably thinking, but who'd ever loan out money? There's a risk involved. Actually, for the really important things, there isn't a risk involved, because a loan for a mortgage, it's collateralized. There's a house there, which people have built. The bank didn't build the house. The builders and other people built the house. So it's a kind of a community thing. I like to think of the example like the Amish people. So when a young couple comes together, you might have seen it in movies. The young couple comes to be, they are going to start out in life, and the whole community from around comes together for a weekend, and they make lemonade and food, and everyone works on the house, and they build them a house in a weekend, or a week or so, and that's their start. Now the interesting thing is, the young couple then has an obligation back to the community, that for all the future young couples that are coming along that need to get a house built in a weekend, they're going to be part of the community that comes and does that. Now, a properly functioning money system should be working like that, whereas the money is just really keeping a track of obligations. So that, in other words, in the beginning of your life, you could get a loan for 200,000, use that 200,000 to buy a house or pay people to build a house, and then pay that back over the course of your life. The difference with interest-free money is the difference between paying back 500,000 euros, including interest, on a mortgage or loan as we do today, or paying back 220,000 euros, including a 10% one-off administration charge to administer the loan over its lifetime. So it's the difference between paying back 220 on a 200k loan versus 500k on a 200k loan. I'll just briefly mention that I was first of all looking at a national solution called social credit, and I still think there's going to be a place for it, but that's a national solution which requires a lot of meetings, a lot bigger than this one, where everybody gets together, gets the idea, elects a government that's going to do it and does it. And we're a long way from that. What I actually prefer now at this time is to get local, regional, mutual credit currencies going, which is interest-free money. And I'm working with a fellow called Anthony Michels, who's just in this next week or two launching interest-free money, which will be mutual credit, and which will also have convertibility, which I believe is a very, very important detail, which means you have an online marketplace so that businesses will be attracted to get involved because they can trade back and forth with euros for the time being. So this is the idea that I'm excited about at the moment, is getting started on something along those lines. But for me, the most important thing is that it's got to be interest-free money. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Carl. The next speaker is James Devaney, coming from a slightly different direction. James joined his local credit union as a board director in January 2013. His background and qualifications are in the field of electronics and software development. He's currently retired. I think he has been mobilised in particular by the effect of the impact of the 2012 Credit Union Act and the directives from the Central Bank, which are effectively taking over the running of the credit union business, basically constraining and restricting them in the way they did business. And he says that last year a credit union member could apply for a loan, and approval was based on two criteria. One, were they regular savers, and two, had they paid back any previous loans. Now, under the new legislation, the Central Bank requires an Irish Credit Bureau credit check on each applicant to determine if that member has defaulted on a mortgage repayment or a credit card debt, which effectively puts the Central Bank in control of credit union lending and restricts the credit union staff and board in their decision-making process. So that's where James is coming from. So, James Devaney.
It's very interesting to hear that as they are talking about banking, because it really affects us in the credit union movement. And since I joined the credit union board of my local credit union this year, I've learned an awful lot about banking, things I don't like to see, but there are things we have to deal with. I think it's fairly well known that about 70% of the adult population of Ireland, about 3.1 billion people, are members of credit unions. And the reason basically that I ended up on the board of the credit union, I had no plans, I had retired, I was taking things nice and handy. And 4 of the 9 directors of our board retired or resigned in December of last year for 2 particular reasons. One is the 2012 Credit Union Act, which criminalises the directors of any credit union board, even though you're a volunteer. It means that we make a mistake, or it can be pointed out in court that we voted on a loan or something that malfunctioned, we can be charged as a criminal, brought to court, convicted and land in jail. And that law doesn't apply to bankers who are on €500,000 or 800,000 euros per annum. The credit union movement has about 4,500 people working for it. But there's another 9,500 volunteers like myself who help to keep the credit unions across the country working and functioning by drawing up strategic plans, assisting with draws, whatever, visiting people, talking through loan problems. A lot of that is done on a voluntary basis. So altogether you have about 15,000, 16,000 people involved in credit unions. The other big problem that John referred to there is that in February of this year, the central bank issued a letter, and I believe there's a copy of it down there. It's available on the Civil Service Credit Union website as well for downloading. But that letter, basically a directive from the central bank to say that we no longer can lend to our members, even though they have a good saving record, and that paid back all previous loans, which is the basis that we used for granting all new loans. We now must run a credit check on them. And this is at the instigation of the banks, because what the banks want, and they've said this to us unofficially, is that if somebody can't pay their mortgage, well then we shouldn't give them a loan, because that money that's going towards paying the loan rightfully belongs to them. The second thing is if they run into problems with their credit cards, we have to check that as well. And according to that letter, we're supposed to refuse them for the same reason. Basically, that letter takes the power from us as directors to grant loans to our members. And remember, we're there in 2 roles, basically to ensure that the members' funds are protected by wise investment or by giving the money back to them in loans, and to ensure that the members themselves are looked after whatever way the credit union can. And that can be through sponsorship or whatever. There are several things we can do in the credit union. The other thing about the credit union movement is that we don't get involved in fractional lending, which is what Paul is talking about, where the bank may have, say, €1 million in assets, but they can lend maybe 10 times or 1 million times what they have. So they actually are creating debt, which is a major problem. Credit unions can only use the money that the members have saved with them, which is very important. That money goes back into the community itself. The other thing is that the banks put a lot of pressure on the central bank recently, and they brought on board a lady by the name of Fiona Muldoon, and her job is to bring the banks and the credit unions together to debt share, which is a brilliant term because the credit unions have no debts. And I compared to 2 of us going for a meal, and one of us having a glass of water and the other was having a full steak lunch or dinner. And we agreed beforehand that we'll share the cost of the meal. Well, somebody's really at a big disadvantage there straight away. And the same thing with the credit unions, because any of them that ran into financial trouble was helped by the Irish League of Credit Unions fund, which was specifically contributed by all credit unions in case one of them got into trouble. So credit unions didn't cost the taxpayer any money. But the banks want us to share their debts with us. And That's because the credit union movement has about 16 billion of assets. About 10 billion of that is in liquid form. About the rest of it is in capital costs, buildings, machinery, equipment, whatever. They're looking for 750 credit union members at the moment to volunteer for that debt sharing service. And those members must be in mortgage, not be able to pay their mortgages at the moment. Now, the outcome of that is that if they can't pay their mortgages over the next 2 years, any debts they have with the credit union will automatically be written off. So we lose on that account, and we've no say in it. Also, with the Personal Insolvency Act that came in this year, even though, as one friend of mine who's a solicitor said, anyone that's in trouble with their mortgage at the moment, if they sign up to the Personal Insolvency Act, they really know what trouble is, and that's a polite version of what he said. But under that act, if the mortgage is non-performing, at any stage the bank can write off the loans that they have with other financial institutions, and that includes the credit union, and again we have no say in that. The restructuring board was also implemented this year by the central bank to reduce the number of credit unions down from 400 to 200, and maybe less. And the first one of them would be Newbridge Credit Union, which a lot of you would have heard about. And the basis, it seems, that the Pig Newbridge is that they have a new building there, which I believe cost around 20 million, and they estimate that building is now worth about $500,000. So on that basis, when you adjust the balance sheet accordingly, they're down 19.5 million, which can really show that a credit union can be loss-making, which in fact they're not, because they've been profitable up to last year. But it's a tool to say, look, this is a badly managed credit union, and we're going to amalgamate it with Nace. And that can be done with the likes of Castlereagh, which has a new building. Same thing's happening with Maynooth at the moment, they're after them. And there's going to be another 200 picked around the country, and we'll try and amalgamate them with another 200. The other thing is SEPA is kicking in September. And most people haven't heard about this, but it stands for the Single European Payments Area. And I left some brochures down there about it as well. Under that, the government stopped printing checks last month. So anybody that was getting social welfare pensions or whatever from the state had to open a bank account if they didn't have one, and the money would be electronically transferred into it. And from September, all financial institutions have to start using EFT, electronic fund transfers, including the credit unions, which most of them wouldn't have been doing up to now. But from the 1st of February next year, there will be no checks in our society. The big question is people that, and I know a lot of young people in this country, because the checks come into us, a lot of people get checks from America and England, from relatives or whatever, from the States in particular. So they'll have a particular predicament from next February. But the ultimate aim of the SEPA Act is that by the 1st of January 2017, there will be no cash in our society. And as Paul pointed out there, there's only 3% of cash at the moment in our society, compared to about 20%, I think, 10 years ago. And you can see where the cash is being gradually removed, the liquid form of currency is being gradually removed from our society. By the 1st of January, there'll be no cash, and that will have implications for all of us. There's a psychological issue relating to handling of cash, feel of money, the issue with getting something that you can touch and feel for as reward for your work. It also has major implications for people involved in the service industry, and the banks see it as a great way to monitor, and so does the government monitor the black economy, which seems to be the only thing at the moment that's keeping our economy going. Just one thing, I'll finish up in a few moments, John. The Irish League of Credit Unions had a stability fund there, but the government has brought in their own stabilisation fund, which they put 250 million into, and that's to try and undermine the Irish League of Credit Unions. It makes their fund superfluous now, because the government says you must use our fund if you get into trouble. But as Ronnie Reagan used to say, and we probably laugh at him in some ways, but he did say what the government tried to control, they'll fund for us, not to subsidise. And there's some truth in that. Yes, as regards the SEPA thing, the computer systems will be based in Europe, and you're totally at the control of a computer somewhere who will determine, based on your spending experience, whether you can be shut off, whatever, at a moment's notice. And some of you will have found at the moment, if you use your credit card, if you buy something in England or Spain or wherever, they may ring you up and say, is this a valid transaction? Because the computer system is monitoring you based on your profile. And the same thing will happen with the SEPA system. As regards payments, most payments will be done by e-wallet on your mobile phone. You'll have a card, an ATM card, whatever. It fully hasn't been sorted out yet, and we're still trying to get answers from the central bank on some issues. The other thing is that it seriously affects direct debits, and I've been in the Dáil on a number of occasions dealing with that, and that's a major legal issue for a lot of credit unions and anyone that deals in direct debits. There's a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves, because the credit union movement was designed to cater to small communities, not be very big in most situations. If you look at Germany, all their credit unions and their banks are small, town-based. And we were asking ourselves in our own credit union, has our one got too big? And really, rather than amalgamate them and make them bigger, they should be made, some of them should be split and made much smaller and responsive to the community, because some of them really got out of control during the boom. And we're seeing as a national movement a major impact from that now. And that's what the bank and the central bank and government are taking advantage of. The other thing that we're looking at, and we have a meeting arranged for the second week in October, is getting a public bank going, or a people's bank. Because one of the big problems that we have in the credit union movement is that there's another director from the central bank that says we must only invest our money in an A-rated bank. We must spread our risk across all A-rated banks, and there must be separate ownership. The big problem is that we've no A-rated bank in Ireland. They're all under government control or owned by the government. So it places us in a predicament that if we are investing members' money, we have to put into an Irish bank that could topple at any time. And for that reason, we need to look at different issues like public banks. I myself would prefer a people's bank that the people own, their shareholders in it, the profits from the bank go back to them,